Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Supervised Assessment Professional Learning Workshop. This morning, we have a session on supporting students in supervised assessment, clear communication, fair practice, and positive experience, and it's being run by Sangeeta Kirsten and Andrea Francis from the Division of Learning and Teaching. And before I hand over to the EDs to run this session, I will point out that the session's being recorded and that all of the artifacts from the session will be provided both to participants and wider shortly after the session finishes. We provide those events through the Teaching Academy Events tab. You're able to access the assets, and the recording goes on to the Teaching Academy YouTube channel. And I believe everything connected to supervised assessment is also being added into the supervised assessment hub, which no doubt will be talked about at some point today as well. As with our sessions, normally with PD, we encourage you to put commentary, etc., into the chat. We have a number of other people from the division here to help facilitate those questions and comments. If you do have a question that requires more comprehensive feedback, then I suggest you pop it into the Q&A. We do collect all of the questions going into the question and answers area in Teams to inform not only our existing documentation like FAQs and what have you, but it also helps to develop other resources and further sessions where we need to run them. So you've got the chat, you've got the Q&A, and at the end of the session, I believe the EDs will have time for questions, etc., for those of you wanting to come off mute and ask them at that point as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sangeeta and Andrea. Over to you.
Thanks, Lachlan. Welcome, everyone. So our last few sessions, the team focused on technical aspects of the supervised assessment, and Andrea and I will focus on the student experience and what students need today. So I begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, the traditional custodians of the lands on which I am joining you from today, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I also want to take a moment to thank Auntie Liana, Uncle Lloyd, and Tracy Ryan, who have generously guided me as I continue to learn about this continent's history. And I invite you to take a moment and share in the chat the lands you are joining us from today. So we are planning 45 minutes together, followed by 15 minutes for questions. Andrea and I want to acknowledge that we are all arriving here carrying different things. Some of us may be holding grief or uncertainty about what is happening in the world, and we recognize that. Change in our work can add its own weight too. So we ask that we extend grace to each other and assume positive intentions as we navigate this together. Any relevant visuals will be described. During the session, there will be opportunities to engage with mentee, so there is space for collective sharing. We would really love you to do this if you feel comfortable, and we also recognize that there are many ways to engage, and we know that silence can be an engaged state too. Today, we are going to focus on 3 things: communicating with transparency, building trust through clarity and inclusive conditions, and preparing students before and during and after supervised assessment. All of this with one simple goal: making sure every student, whatever their circumstances, feel informed and supported. And I'm going to hand over to Beck, who will briefly update us on alternative arrangements now.
Thanks, Sangeeta. So I'm just going to quickly talk about some of the alternative arrangement information that we have. I might just share my screen so I can take you through the website. I've just popped into the chat. So on our DLT website, we have some information around alternative arrangements for supervised oral assessment. Now, this information has been developed in alignment with our accessibility and inclusion colleagues and has been approved by the DVC Act as a pilot information to be used during this first session where we will also then be sense checking, moving it into the assessment flexibility procedure. It's been modelled off that information, and it supports equitable access to study in line with the university's legislative obligations and existing assessment policy while maintaining confidence in academic standards. So what we'll look at in the document in a moment are some of the examples of minor adjustments that may be recommended through accessibility and inclusion processes, and major alternative arrangements that require academic approval. So this particular information, which you can find on this website, as I'll scroll down and click on the little guidelines here, will pop open a document that speaks to some of the adjustments that are available or might be applied to support students with study access plans. So this document is available, and I encourage you to go and have a bit of a look at it. It is modelled off of the existing procedure that we have in place, the assessment flexibility procedure, and it does walk through some of the reasonable adjustments that can be applied by the accessibility and inclusion advisors. Some of these are things around the use of adaptive software, also potentially providing information to students in different ways, giving additional time. And there are also some major alternative supervised assessment arrangements. This information has been provided to heads of school and to other stakeholders to support you as academic staff to engage with students who may request particular arrangements as a part of supervised assessment. So more than happy for you to have some time to go through that information, but there will be some other communications coming out around this. It is a way for us to sense check and pilot this information and these opportunities to support students with study access plans prior to moving it into that procedure space where we have similar types of arrangements for students on study access plans for different types of assessment. So I'll pop the link in the chat to this specific document, but it can be found on that original page that I've linked to just here on this particular button. So I'll stop sharing and hand back to Sangeeta and Andrea, but thank you both. And yeah, if there are any questions, happy to answer those in the Q&A pod or in the chat.
Thank you so much, Beck. So, okay. So we want all of you to think about your students in your courses. So some of them are like Maya. She's a part-time student and a carer, someone who relies on flexibility of online learning. When she heard about supervised assessment, she had so many questions because this was new to her. What does this mean for me? Do I need to take time off for this? Will I be judged on how I speak? These are not small questions. For students like Maya, these questions shape how they feel. So this is where clear communication matters. Throughout today's session, we are going to use Maya's experience as our anchor, and I hope you can think about your students as we talk through different aspects. So we know the institutional rationale. We want to focus on a different question. How do we communicate this in a way that makes sense to a student like Maya? And that begins with shared language. Supervised assessment creates space for real-time interaction between student and assessor. It is about engaging with them as they learn, seeing how they reason, apply their knowledge, and demonstrate thinking in action. And when we share that understanding, our communication becomes clearer too. So how do we communicate supervised assessment matters? And one of the most powerful ways we can do that is through the lens of professional identity. When we frame assessment around their future, it means something different to students. It becomes about preparing for the moments that matter in their field. A nurse explaining a care plan to a patient, a teacher navigating difficult conversation with a parent, a business graduate presenting to a client. When we communicate in that context, we are telling students that their effort, their reasoning, and their decision-making are seen and valued. And now we want to talk about language matters. So we have a Menti activity for you. If you could join the Menti, and Elise, are you able to drop the Menti link in the chat? So on Menti, you will see a scale on one side, language to use with your students, and on the other, language to avoid. So we have given you 4 examples to place on the scale. Take a moment and place each one where you think it belongs. Thank you so much for sharing. I think all of us are in the same page. We can move on, Andrea. Thank you. So if we are communicating supervised assessment through the lens of professional identity, the language we use has to match that intent. So deficit framing can quietly undermine everything because it centers suspicion and doubt. It is telling students that they need to prove themselves, not only academically, but morally as well. So the impact is very real. It raises anxiety, chips away at how students see themselves. So for students already navigating complex lives, that added weight can be significant. So strengths-based language puts the student at center. So instead of language that signals surveillance, we use language that signals support. Something as simple as this gives you an opportunity to explain your thinking in your own words changes the entire tone. So when our language reflects growth and fairness, students come into the assessment feeling recognized. And strengths-based language best works if it is consistent. When students hear different messages from different staff or schools, it creates confusion and erodes trust. Consistency signals that the process is fair and that every student wants to hear the same message. And when the communication is also about trust building and professional, it reinforces the very skills we want students to develop. All right, so we have talked about what supervised assessment is, why it matters, and how our language and consistency shapes the student experience. We would like you to take a moment and think about your own students. So if we go to a mentee again, so this is a good place to share your thoughts. How do you communicate with your students about supervised assessment so we can actually learn from each other? And there are no right or wrong answers. We are just curious to learn about what matters to you and what you want your students to take away. So from class 1 with opportunity to practice, to help them in their careers, engaging learning experience. I really like we want to know you and how you learn. I think that will help to develop relationship with students. Is a chance to demonstrate their learning and develop professional skills that will support them in their workforce and professional context. I also like gives you an opportunity to share the best part of your learning. So there's some student agency there. Okay, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And please keep adding to it as you think about it, because this we could always download and share it with you. And this will help us to create a very shared understanding among CSU. So let's come back to Maya. So good communication is already building trust. She understands that supervised assessment is part of her professional growth, not something to fear, but she is still anxious. She's working out how to fit this around her caring responsibility, but she is hopeful. And the practical questions start. Can I choose a date? Where do I book? So she turns to Brightspace looking for answers. So clarity is one of the most practical ways we can build trust with students like Maya. When Maya goes into Brightspace, she needs to find the booking link easily, know she can book through Microsoft Bookings, and see that there is a range of days and times that work around a schedule as a carer. She also needs to know what to expect around verification, what ID she needs to bring, and also know that ID check will not be recorded or screenshots taken. That kind of transparency turns a potentially anxious moment into a straightforward one. And on the technology side, simple reminders go a long way. She needs to have fully charged device and a reliable internet. She should test the camera and microphone in advance. So small details that help her feel prepared and not caught off guard. So we just want to show you that we already have a booking template page in Brightspace. So when you create a page, if you go under templates, you will see the booking template. So this will help us with consistency in all our subjects, and all of us are communicating the same thing. And this will definitely help you speed up your setup process. So doing all these will ensure communication and clear and consistent among subjects. So Elise will share the Padlets for the operational setup in the chat, so that if you have that at hand too, if you need it. Thank you, Andrea. So clarity helped Maya know what to do. Inclusive conditions help her know she belongs in the room. So Maya has questions that many students quietly carry, like, can I look away or take pauses while I speak? These are not unreasonable requests. Getting this right makes a real difference. So students can pause, move, or look away while responding, and pace and accent are not penalized. Processing time is built in, not an afterthought. And where additional time is required, this may be supported through the formal reasonable adjustment process and through academics' professional judgment. So we ensure questions are available in both written and spoken form, and also make it clear if students are allowed to use notes. So when we communicate this clearly and upfront, we are telling students like Maya that this process was designed with them in mind. And we want to acknowledge that inclusive conditions is a much larger conversation. So we will have another session on this. And here are some Brightspace tips. So you can create a ready-to-use announcement template to let your students know about their upcoming supervised assessment and what to expect. You can set up an intelligent agent to send an automated reminder a week before, so students have time to prepare. You can also create a checklist using an accordion or timeline elements in Brightspace, giving students a clear and step-by-step view of what they need to do. So now I'll hand over to Andrea, who will give you a range of practical ideas to prepare your students.
Thanks, Sangeeta. Once students have a clear messaging about what is involved in supervised assessment, we can now turn our attention to how we prepare our students. Some questions that Maya might have that we could prepare for in advance might include thinking about what good responses look like, knowing how the session will run, how to incorporate practice sessions for students, and where to provide exemplars and resources for students. Universal Design for Learning recognises that students do not all engage with information in the same way. Some prefer to watch, some prefer to read, some benefit from examples, and others need reassurance about the process before they feel ready to begin. Instead of assuming one explanation will work for everybody, UDL encourages us to provide multiple pathways to clarity. As we start to think about how to prepare our students, it's worth thinking about how we can present information in multiple ways within our subject sites to support the needs of all learners. This is where the concept of the keys comes in. Each key can unlock support for students in a slightly different way. Individually, each key helps, but together they open the doors for more students to feel prepared and capable, which is essentially what UDL is aiming for, designing learning so more students can access success from the start. For Maya, not knowing who she will meet adds unnecessary anxiety. A brief introduction or video in the subject site humanises the assessor and reduces the unknown. When markers share a little of their personal journey or their professional journey, and where appropriate, maybe a small personal insight, students begin to develop a sense of trust and connection. This helps to shift the interaction from an anonymous evaluation with a total stranger to a professional conversation within a community they are becoming a part of. Taking a moment to build a sense of familiarity for students can be one small step towards developing belonging, trust, and a sense of connectedness. Sharing the student voice is a powerful way to build confidence and reduce uncertainty. Hearing directly from students who have experienced supervised assessment helps make the process feel real, more relatable, realistic, and achievable. On the screen are links to the Introducing Interactive Oral Assessment overview and the recently published Charlie blog. These resources bring together student perspective on what student assessment is like, what to expect, and how to prepare. For students who may feel unsure or anxious, this can help normalise the experience and provide reassurance that they are not alone. The Charlie blog is a great example of this in action, offering authentic student insight into supervised assessment and how to approach them. Embedding student voice alongside your other preparation resources can help students like Maya to feel more confident, more prepared, and ready to engage. These slides will be sent out to all participants after today's session, so you'll have access to all the links we share with you for easy access to embed them into your site. And I can see there Sue's asking for them in the chat, so Elise might be able to dump them in the chat as well as we're going. One of the highest impact supports we can offer is familiarity. For Maya, uncertainty is costly. She cannot afford to guess what good looks like. A short sample video of a supervised assessment, even just 5 minutes, helps to provide clarity to students for what is expected. It provides opportunities to see the tone, the pacing, the level of depth expected. It demystifies the experience and it has a positive impact on student confidence. I'd like to acknowledge Admita Krautlaher, who has been championing IOAs for a few years now and has worked with many academics across the university to support them in setting these up and developing these exemplar resources. The example you have here on your screen is, which you can watch at a later date, comes from JST 220, where the subject coordinator plays the role of a student and Amita is playing the role of the assessor. The scenario provided here is slightly different to the one provided to the students in the assessment, which allows it to be reused across sessions too. This recording could be used as a lead-up activity alongside a marking rubric in a workshop or tutorial. After viewing, you might support students with some scaffolding to evaluate it. Where does it meet expectations? Where does it fall short? What could improve it? Notice the pauses and the time to think. It's important to normalise these imperfections. When students like Maya take the time to apply the rubric to a sample recording, they begin to recognise aspects of a quality performance, rather than just relying on assumptions. This helps to build the skills around evaluative judgment and may help to lower anxiety for our students. Students may not always have opportunities to practice speaking about their discipline, but it is such an important graduate skill which is required in the workplace. Small, informal moments in tutorials, whether online in a breakout room or face-to-face, can help students to develop confidence as they gain practice in expressing their disciplinary knowledge aloud in a low-stakes environment. Perhaps you might find opportunities for students to practice explaining key concepts to each other, engage in practice simulated supervised assessments, discuss how they might approach a specific question or problem, and share that with a peer or at the class. You might even consider using peer feedback against one criteria of the marking rubric. Teacher scaffolding would be needed here to prepare students for this, as support may be required for students to engage in the activity. Students don't often yet have the evaluative judgment to apply rubric criteria accurately without the modelling and support. So this step would require active engagement to support students. For online assessments, scheduling time for students to have a practice run at using MS Teams would also be helpful to reduce any technical uncertainty with an unfamiliar platform. With clear guidance and a level of confidence from recent practice opportunities, Maya can now focus all her energy on preparing how to structure her responses, how to explain and refine her responses, and how to use the rubric to support her preparation. The process becomes much clearer for her. Before we move on, we're going to jump back into the Menti once more and just get you to add your thoughts to the page. What is one thing you currently do or that you plan to do to help prepare students? Consider the planning time you have available, the impact it will have on student confidence and their understanding of the task. And also consider if it's something that you might like to reuse for future sessions. So we can see we're just starting to get some responses coming in. Clear instructions with exemplars. Introducing the markers, it's a great way. And obviously within our room, we've got a breadth of experience too, with some people who may have already implemented IOAs for a number of times. So currently already doing practice responses is great. Scaffolding learning activities, practice opportunities is so important. Using the checklist and the Charlie blog, yep, the student voice is a definite So we can see there's lots of ideas coming through with what we could do in workshops, in tutorials, and it's just taking the time to scaffold that learning for the students, building it in so that by the time the supervised assessment arrives, they've prepared, they're confident through all the activities and resources that you provide them. So as we said earlier, please feel free to keep adding to the Menti, and we're happy to share these results as well when the slides come out. Allowing to bring notes, definitely super helpful. We now move on to thinking about how we might support students on the day. The first moments really matter. For many students, they might be nervous and anxious. Clarity during those first minutes helps to ease the stress and reduce some of that cognitive load. A warm welcome and a clear outline of what will happen next can make a real difference. Outlining briefly how the session will run, confirmation about the recording, the session length, and the ID process. If you're unsure what to say, you can refer to the session checklist for academics on the DLT website. That includes a structured guide and a sample script. This supports a fair and well-managed assessment experience for students. Consistency here can also enhance predictability for what the students will expect and provide more space for students to focus on demonstrating their knowledge. We can consider providing an on-the-day checklist in your subject site, or one that you can send out during the announcement the week of your supervised assessment. These can be super helpful to reduce the nerves on the day and might outline reminders about logging in early, confirming ID, how to seek clarification and repeat questions, pausing to think, etc. A sample student preparation checklist has been added this morning to the DLT website, which you can share via your subject site. Having a script for markers can also help to open up the conversation and make students feel comfortable. Think about your own opening phrases and how you will set the tone, as well as the prompting questions you might use aligned to your marking criteria, which Nicole spoke briefly about during Tuesday's session. Outline tips to help students manage their own stress, normalise the pauses, clarifying questions, and provide some advice on breathing strategies if required. If technology issues arise, stay calm and refer to the technical troubleshooting guide on the DLT webpage. At the end of the student checklist that has been added today, you'll notice there's some student-facing tips for technology as well that's also worth highlighting to your students. After the supervised assessment, Allow for a few minutes for a short debrief to help students reflect on how it went and provide clear, non-grade specific feedback, maybe one strength and one area for growth, as timely guidance supports learning and confidence while they wait for formal results to be released on the rubric. Always try to end the session on a positive and supportive note. Be transparent about the feedback process. Having return dates clearly specified in the subject outline with realistic timelines for students and markers. The standard requirements under the assessment policy for the return of assessment work and feedback apply equally to supervised and non-supervised assessments. Where an assessment includes both a written component and a supervised component, feedback may be provided for different components together or separately, depending on your assessment design. For scaffolded assessments, ensure the results are released early enough for students to engage with the feedback and use it to inform their next assessment. Supporting students after their assessment and explaining the feedback process adds another moment of clarity for Maya. She can then use this feedback to grow, reflecting on what went well and where she can improve. It helps her to see the connections between this assessment and her future professional practice. And she can also use her feedback to assist her in a future assessment task. When we do all of these things, communicate with transparency, build trust through clarity and inclusive conditions, and prepare students before, during, and after the assessment, Maya, and hopefully all of your students, can approach their supervised assessments with a positive mindset. We'll leave you with the screen here with the current list of support resources for supervised assessment, thanks to the busy work of Beck and her team. The DLT website is continuing to be updated, along with the FAQ page as new questions are asked. The Teaching Academy also has support resources for assessment with relevant information on the design, delivery, and supporting resources for implementing IOAs. You can log a Sherwell if you need support in creating any resources from DLT. And the newly created Charlie book, as we've already mentioned, offers some great insight into the process. And there is also a student-facing comms page that has an overview of supervised assessment. Before we turn our attention to the Q&A, Sangeeta and I would like to offer our gratitude for your attendance and participation so far. We appreciate you all joining us and contributing to the mentees that were shared. You will see on the screen we have some upcoming sessions next week, which are focused on creating relational experiences and how culture shapes assessment experiences. If you are yet to register, you can do so through the Teaching Academy Teams channel. We will now hand you back to Beck and Elise to address any questions that have been added to the chat and now provide opportunities for you to come off mute and ask any questions related to what we have shared today.
Thanks, Sangeeta and Andrea. That was fabulous. And thank you to everyone for your engagement in the chat and in the Menti. Really appreciate that. I might see if Lachlan or Elise want to flag any questions for the group that are coming out of the chat that we might want to address, or if there are any people who want to come off mute and ask any questions that they might have.
I'll just raise a point, I guess, that's front of mind at the moment, as Kirsten's just put it in there a minute ago, is thinking about, I guess, the feedback loop, both in situ when you're actually with the student and the markers winding that conversation up, and I guess its connection to ultimately providing a score and a grade, and when those things happen and the type of language used, etc. Do you have any thoughts in that space, Beck?
Absolutely. So I think with the in situ kind of feedback that you might give as a way to sort of close the session, it's important to be really explicit and clear. You want to address the things that students have done well, but you might also want to signal and not necessarily get into the details of some of the aspects that you might want to support them to build on or to continue to improve upon. And I think that there does need to be some alignment between the comments that are made in that in situ space and what the student will then get back via their rubrics and grades and marks. I don't think it's expected that you would give them a mark in situ or necessarily get into the real nitty gritty of it. But I think there can be comments like, I really, really enjoyed your answer to the first question. I can see that you're really passionate about that topic and you've got some really great knowledge and understanding of that particular concept, topic, skill, approach. I do think that in some of your other responses, you maybe didn't expand into this kind of aspect. And so I think it would be really great for us to keep working on that together as we progress through this subject and through your course. We'll be giving you a lot more feedback via your rubrics and your comments, but I do want to thank you for today. And you move into that space, and so it can be really constructive, but still really accurate to your observations and understanding of the student's performance. Some people can be really comfortable doing that as a marker or an academic. Some people aren't. This is also a skill that people are going to practice and learn. So it is about thinking about your comfort level. I know that there have been particular design choices to not give students much feedback at the close and to simply just thank them and to let them know what will happen from this point forward. So it is about thinking about what works for you, what works for your students, what works with the design of the assessment, and also understanding that we ourselves are also learning about how to engage in supervised assessment practices. Some disciplines, some courses are very practiced at it and have been doing it for a very long time. Some, this is very new. And so it's important also to extend yourself a bit of grace around that and really set yourself up for success, but also think about how you might want to go about it differently in the future and treat this as an opportunity to really learn as well. Anyone else wanted to add anything into that space from the presenters? No? Any other questions people wanted to address? I see Michelle has her hand up. Sorry, Michelle O'Connor.
Yeah.
So happy to throw to you if you're happy to ask your question or make a comment.
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up on that, Beck, because I was a little bit confused when that we got that information and then the chat started around that with Kirsten. Based on some of the discussions that I had heard in previous PDs, I had kind of thought that we wouldn't give feedback at the end of the supervised assessment because there may be differences between that feedback and the feedback and ultimate mark that a student gets. I guess there's that nuance in interpreting that feedback. And so if you're saying you did that really well, at the end of the session, but then the student doesn't translate into the final mark or the rubric at the end. I think there's some issues with nuance there in giving feedback. So I'm still trying to understand, I guess, how this might work, in practice.
And I think both are reasonable ways to approach it. And you may initially, in adopting this, want to take a more conservative approach to, you want to close on a warm note, but that doesn't necessarily mean having to give really explicit feedback necessarily. But for some markers and staff in particular subjects, and it's important that there's that consistency too, if you do have multiple markers, that you've all agreed that this is how you're going to close things out. We do have some subjects where they're really comfortable giving that feedback in that way, and often they've had time to adjust to that as a practice too, and they have those strategies in place. So it is about having the right approach for the marking team, whether that's one person, whether that's multiple. Also the appropriateness of the task too. So in some of the tasks that are being used as supervised assessments, they come earlier in the session because they want students to be actioning that in future assessment pieces. And it is about sort of supporting them and a little bit of being able to do a slight sort of early intervention with students who are maybe on the wrong path or haven't quite adjusted into certain learning spaces that will support them for their future assessment. So it does come down to a lot of those different pieces, but I think the real takeaway is it's about making sure that everyone who's involved in that marking is comfortable with how you want to go about doing that and what is right for the subject, for the students. And also too, it's about that kind of emerging practice. As we get more comfortable in this space, we may learn what works for us and our students. And it is about ensuring that there is that confidence and that understanding. I appreciate that sometimes we may be concerned that there's that misalignment between what is said and then what comes back. And I do think that that is something definitely to be considering and managing and thinking about how you would ensure to try and keep that consistency for the student. So I appreciate that can be a little bit confusing because it is a little bit around what works, what your confidence level is as an academic and a marker, how many people you're having to coordinate with across the marking, also the subject, the discipline. There's a lot that plays into thinking through how to do this. But I do think that whether you give a lot of feedback or a little bit of feedback, I do think it is really important to think about how to close the supervised assessment on a really positive note for students, even if students perhaps give a performance that isn't necessarily going to be strong in the sense of their marks and things like that. It is important about some of those relational elements of the supervised assessment and trying to support those students in that space. So that is certainly something to consider, but I appreciate there's a diversity of how to go about it. And a one size fits all approach is never really going to work across everything. So it is about working through that. Are there any other questions or elements coming out in the chat that we want to address, or any questions people want to ask?
Beck, there's a question earlier from Gemma Wilkins asking about the student skills team, the academic skills embedded tutors, and whether they're preparing to prepare any resources. Do you want to address that? From what I've heard, I feel like the academic skills are working with certain subjects to apply some contextualized support. So I guess my advice would be to reach out to academic skills. In the past, they have provided some generalized IOA support that could be embedded into sites, but I don't think that yet has been developed for supervised assessment because it's so nuanced and different across different subjects. Beck, you might want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think that all of those things are absolutely what's taking place. I think there is also some existing resources that are available that they're curating and building a bit of a collection of that they'll be launching around types of oral assessment, but also other types of supervised assessment. So definitely a watch this space or reach out.
Beck, do you mind if I jump in? I was actually,
absolutely.
Thanks. I was actually asking on behalf of the team because I represent the team. We have been, as you just said, looking at curating the resources that we currently have, especially for preparing for oral presentations. But I can see that there are a lot of resources that you're making available and recommendations, and we're just very keen to not duplicate and wanting to know where we can fit into the supports that are being provided. So if anyone does have some feedback or some specific requests, we'd be very open to helping develop something specific. So yeah, that was why I added that question in. If anyone wants to reach out, that'd be lovely.
I'm glad we didn't say completely the wrong thing there, Gemma.
It was awesome. Thank you.
I fear you may be very popular very soon, but no, that's brilliant to have that support there. And yeah, the resources I've seen have been really fabulous, where they're building that student understanding as well too. So that's great. So thanks, Gemma.
Thanks, Ben.
Any other questions coming out of the chat? I think there were some elements around providing questions up front. So that is sometimes an adjustment for a student on a study access plan that may be requested. And so how you go about that is something that you can discuss with that student if you need to provide those questions up front and particular formats. There may be also certain arrangements in place with regards to providing the questions during the supervised assessment in a written format, and that is where you can use the chat to be able to post that, making sure the student can access that information. So I would highly recommend having those conversations directly with the students that have those alternative arrangements in place, and making sure that the approach fits with the needs that they have, because obviously formats and things, if they're going to be using a screen reader, formatting can be really important. If it is more of a general being able to feel more prepared given their particular study access plan, some of those things are more at play or less at play depending on the specific needs of the student. So I would advise having that conversation. And if you do need support, having a discussion with accessibility inclusion so they can help you with that particular approach too. Michelle, I can see you have your hand up.
Another question, a technical question. I just saw there in the chat that Lachlan had responded to someone's question about starting the recording. Given that all of us, I guess, at some point have forgotten to start a recording, is there any chance that the automatic recording could be set up so that it starts recording automatically as soon as the session starts? No, Lachlan, I can see you shaking your head. No.
So in Teams, if you're using Microsoft Bookings, because we're using the Teams platform, we can't, through the booking system, automatically apply turning on the recording. We are looking at how we configure that into the future. What you can do, although this may not be a technical answer that you want to hear, is that after the appointment is booked, you can actually go into the Teams room once it's been generated and then change those settings to have it automatically record. But you do need to do that appointment by appointment, which is effectively student by student. It's not a particularly functional approach, but it is why we have also been suggesting that whilst having the recording is best practice and we would want that, making sure that you're taking those observational notes during the supervised assessment so that you have that as a piece of data effectively, as well as your rubric and your feedback, can also support what you may need to do in lieu of a recording. It's best practice to sort of have a couple of things in place in that sense. So recordings can fail even if you do click the button. Lots of things can happen in that sort of space. So we are encouraging people to have a variety of information and documentation of their observations of the students' performance to be able to support them with any needs that arise. But we are also having we have a checklist for conducting it that has a really strong prompt to actually explicitly tell the student that you're starting the recording. And it also means too that this really helps us with ID checks, which we don't want recorded for lots and lots of reasons.
Oh, so interesting. So you can't start the recording until after the student has shown their student ID.
It's best practice to not start the recording until after that. So following the checklist, as we've got up on the screen, does give you some really strong prompts on how to complete that, and even some sample script elements. And we're hoping that in saying, I am now going to start the recording, that will be a nice trigger point for us as a behavioral thing. But we are also looking into how we can potentially move forward into the future in a way where we do have automatic recording on, but can still pause that for the ID check, potentially move it forward, because we do appreciate that automatic recording can be very valuable. But unfortunately, through the MS bookings process, we aren't able to preemptively change the team room standard config. And so that is a challenge that we're working through at the moment. So we have set up some of these other systems to support with the reminders to put the recordings on, and where there's no recording, really trying to make sure we have those notes and the rubric and the feedback to be able to review.
Thanks, Beck. I knew you'd be all over it.
I don't know about that. I'm always happy to hear questions or things, because there's so many different approaches and lots of things that we can do. So more than happy for people to ask their questions and engage in that way. Lachlan and others, are there any questions in the chat or anything anyone wants to address from the chat that's been rolling past me? I haven't been keeping up on it.
fairly robust discussion going on about the use of Zoom rather than Teams and things, which I'm sort of engaging with at the chat. But the main, I guess, point to that conversation is that the process that's in place that's supported by DIT and DLT for bookings and supervised assessment requiring video components is the use of Teams, as it leverages obviously bookings, Outlook, our existing supported systems. So whilst I can appreciate that people might have some either pre-existing approaches and tools, etc., people still talk to me about Calendly, for example, and other approaches they've used in the past. Which technically we'd sort of call, legacy approaches that we're sort of winding down, or we're still using this session or whatever. The process that's in place that the resources that we do have can support is the use of bookings to organise the sessions, the use of Teams for the meetings, and then the recordings and how we approach those, which we'll be talking about in subsequent sessions. So robust discussion is good. I appreciate people are going to have different ways that they're tackling this, but I can also only respond in terms of what the division and DIT and others in your team, etc., Becca, are able to support in that space. I don't know if you want to weigh in on that or not.
Just to add that it's not a requirement that people use bookings. I would highly recommend it. It is supported, and we do have a lot of functionality within that space that allows it to be a really streamlined and so far smooth approach to getting lots of students, lots of appointments. Students can access Teams as guests, and we have information in the template page in Brightspace that will actually walk students through either installing the desktop application, but also with the student checklist that we showed earlier in this PD session. There are some common troubleshooting I guess, information available for students within that guide to help them with Teams as well. So they will be coming in as guests at this stage, and they can access that in that way. So you are still able to consider using Zoom if you would like, but there are some tensions between using bookings and having Zoom rooms set up. It can be a bit more of a manual and a little bit more, I would honestly say it is quite complex to set that up, but if you are confident in that space and you have a strong reason for wanting to use Zoom, I think that you can do that as well. So it's definitely something to consider, but I would very much promote the use of bookings, because we do have a lot of support resources and help available to ensure that that's set up correctly for you and your students.
Hi, Beck. Sorry, I may have missed this. For if we use Teams and the supervised assessment is scheduled in the evenings or the weekend, did you say that there will be DIT support or not? Or we
There
don't know yet?
is baseline DIT support that staff can access by logging a job. There isn't targeted support because during those time periods, it is just joining a Teams room. So unless there are massive technical issues with Teams, it is fairly straightforward at that point. There can be individual, I guess, config issues that you might need to work through, or particular technology setups, but that is why we would really advise testing a lot of this well in advance during the regular hours. So if you do need that targeted support as an academic or a marker, that you can get that support well before we hit the evenings and the weekends, Kath. But there is support available, but it may not be as timely as people may like if they're experiencing those strong issues. But it is also unlikely for there to be really, really big issues with the actual technical platforms. It usually is that individual device or particular settings at the individual user level that we're usually working through at that point. So my advice would be to, once you've got that set up, jump into Teams, check that it's working, make sure that you understand it, test it in the conditions you intend to use it as a marker. So if you're going to be at home, test it in that environment, use the device you're planning to use for marking, and really engage in those practice behaviours. Anella, I see you have your hand up.
I have a strange question that just came to me. Well, I've never done the ID check, on somebody else. And what if in that moment I don't think that the photo on the ID looks like the student? What do I do then?
We have some really great resources around the ID checking process, which I'll pop into the chat.
Thank you.
Our standard piece of advice is for you to note that down, not to necessarily address that with the student or to ask any further questions about that point, but to make a note of that. And then as you progress through the supervised assessment and move into that sort of post-supervised assessment, really thinking through what that might mean, how you can kind of flag that if you engage in that space, because we are looking to do this really just as a small point of verification. We obviously have other identification verification that happens through admissions and other things. So it can be really small scale in that sense. So it would just be about making that note and then moving forward and seeking some advice if you feel that there is something happening there that you are uncomfortable with or that you're not certain about. But I do have some really great information and advice around the ID checking that I'll pop into the chat for you as well.
Nikki has a question for you, Beck, I believe.
Brilliant. Nikki.
Hi, Beck. I'm just thinking about the timeline, how we mark these. We've got in Inclusive Ed, we've got some markers that teach full-time at school and are used to marking. And so one of them's doing 60 assessments, and I'm just wondering about, what's the best, should we stick to a specific time frame? It's going to be, I can just say that some students are going to be doing theirs quite early and others will be quite late.
Yeah, so again, it's not necessarily an issue to have a wide window that the supervised assessments are happening within. Often with the supervised assessments, because they are tailored to the student, either through responding to a previous written assessment that they've submitted or through their personal professional practice experiences or the things there. And because the questions are often sort of changing, they're not set and standard often, having that wider window isn't as big of a concern if it was they're getting asked the exact same questions that they could then share and those sorts of concerns. So no, we do have some supervised assessments that run over a really wide window of dates, and that's perfectly fine. And for a staff member, it is about sort of working with them to determine the timeframes that suit them. And how many to do is another question that we often get, and that is really dependent on the person. We have some markers who can just do heaps in a row and feel fine, and they love that. We have others where they do need more regular breaks, and that's perfectly fine as well. But we do often always recommend having buffer time included within the duration. So if it's actually a 15-minute conversation with the student, that the appointment's actually for 30 minutes so that you have bit of backup time for any technical issues, as well as a bit of downtime for your marker to finalize some of their administrative pieces too. So it can be quite personal how people like to go about this. But I think having that buffer time and also easing into it, so not being too ambitious. So if you're going to do a 2-hour window and that is going to be for students, you might initially put a half an hour break in there just so that they adjust, and they might then get more comfortable to have a larger volume of students within a particular period of time.
Okay. And if we're providing a scenario that they are to respond to 24 hours beforehand, we might need a range of scenarios to cover that large window.
I would suggest a range of scenarios is a great practice to consider. And it also means too that you're sort of building out a bit of a catalogue, and students are getting that kind of variety too. So absolutely you can do that and have that kind of point of difference for the students over time. Yeah, so it really depends on sort of that design of the assessment and what would work in that sense, and making sure that all of those case studies that you're providing have the same level of information for students to draw upon to help with their questions, and just some of those consistency pieces, which I'm sure is what people do in this situation anyway. But yeah, that would definitely be my advice.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, Lachlan, I notice we're a little bit over time, so more than happy for people to ask any further questions that they might have, but also just to thank everyone for their time. And if you have any further questions, we do have upcoming sessions that we would be very happy for you to attend. And also just again to thank Sangeeta and Andrea and the team for their presentation today. I think it was absolutely fabulous.